A missile struck the courtyard of Burkina Faso's national television station. An explosion not just of gunpowder, but of suspicion, rumor, and fear. Almost instantly, Western media outlets rolled out headlines of panic. Coup in Ouagadougou. President flees. Burkina crumbles. But what followed defied every script they'd rehearsed. 7 days after the blast, a man in uniform walked calmly into the RTB building. No guards, no shields, no filters. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the youngest head of state in Africa, stood face to face with the very workers who'd felt the shockwave. He did not flinch. He did not deflect. He looked them in the eye and said, "We do not kneel, not to lies, not to fear, not to anyone but God and our parents." What gives a man such defiance in the face of fire? How does a continent break the chains of manipulation and reclaim its voice? Stay with us, because this story isn't just about politics. It's about pride. It's about truth. It's about an Africa rising. It was supposed to be a regular day in Ouagadougou, morning coffee, the hum of broadcast equipment, and the quiet rhythm of journalists preparing for another day of news at the Radio Diffusion Television du Burkina, RTB. But that calm was shattered by a sound no one expected. A sudden, thunderous explosion ripping through the courtyard of the national broadcaster. Initial reports were chaotic, smoke rising from within the RTB compound, staff fleeing the scene, rumors swirling like dust over the capital. Had there been an attack? Was the government under siege? Whispers of a coup began to ripple through social media. The truth, however, was far more sobering and far less sinister. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, then in a closed-door cabinet meeting, later explained the incident with a level of transparency few African heads of state have ever dared. According to him, the explosion was not an act of terrorism or sabotage. It was, in fact, a tragic mistake, an accidental discharge of a military projectile caused during a routine security operation. The presidential compound and RTB headquarters are considered strategic zones, with strict and sometimes aggressive military patrols. In the wake of increased threats from jihadist groups and insurgents, security protocols had been tightened. That morning, one soldier, attempting to inspect a piece of equipment, mistakenly triggered the launch of a rocket-propelled grenade. The result? A direct hit within RTB's inner yard. 2 soldiers were injured in the blast. Both were immediately transferred to the Elgato hospital. By the grace of God, Traoré later said, they survived. The injuries were serious, shrapnel damage, especially to the hands. But no one died. Staff at RTB were treated for shock and trauma, and psychological support teams were dispatched the same day. Yet even as the dust was settling, an entirely different kind of assault had begun, one of words, manipulation, and manufactured chaos. Western media outlets, France 24, RFI, Le Monde, published a flurry of stories. Claims emerged that Traoré had fled the capital. Helicopters were said to be evacuating officials to Dori. IL-76 aircraft landing at Ouagadougou were branded as Russian mercenary drops. The word coup was once again being echoed in editorial rooms across Europe. But what silenced those voices was not a press conference, nor a cold statement from a government spokesman. It was something infinitely more powerful. Traoré himself, unarmed, walking into the very building that had just been hit. He didn't come with a motorcade. He didn't wear a flak jacket. Instead, he greeted staff members one by one, answered their questions without hesitation, and gave them the truth. "I saw the crater with my own eyes," he told them. "It was an accident, nothing more. And you, the people who were here, deserve to hear that first, not through someone else's spin." The leader did not deflect blame. He admitted that the security forces, tasked with protecting the area, had unintentionally caused the explosion. He apologized, reassured, and showed a rare humility, speaking not from behind a podium, but on the same level as the people. What's more, he refused to let fear take hold. To the staff, visibly shaken, he said, "You felt like a target. That fear is real. But understand this. We put every measure in place to protect you, and even in error, we will stand with you." In the hours that followed, national channels broadcast his visit, and footage of Traore calmly explaining the incident spread across social media. But even more powerful than his explanation was his attitude, firm, unshaken, and profoundly human. As the narrative of President in hiding collapsed under the weight of reality, the true nature of the information war became clear. The explosion was real, but so were the lies. The missiles may have been accidental, but the misinformation was targeted, deliberate, and widespread. Still, what stood out most was this. In a moment that could have broken public trust, Ibrahim Traoré walked into the fire instead of away from it. He didn't wait for his advisors. He didn't hide behind layers of security. He chose transparency, and in doing so disarmed more than just the bomb that fell. He disarmed fear itself, but what Traoré said next would ignite more than reassurance. It would spark a movement. In the world of politics, silence is often mistaken for weakness. But Ibrahim Traoré's silence, in the days following the RTB explosion, was not absence. It was strategy. When he finally spoke, he did so with the clarity of a soldier and the fire of a revolutionary. "We do not flee, ever," he declared in front of the RTB staff and later to the nation. "We are soldiers. We do not retreat. We do not abandon. And we kneel to no one except our parents and our God." Those words, delivered with unwavering conviction, cut through the fog of rumors like a blade. They weren't part of a prepared speech. They came from a place of deep frustration. A place many in Africa know too well. The endless cycle of foreign manipulation, false narratives, and stolen dignity. What followed was more than just a response to gossip. It was a declaration of ideological war. Traoré went on to dismantle the claims spread by Western outlets. Reports of helicopters evacuating leaders? Ridiculous, and he said. They were, in fact, transporting reinforcements for an anti-terror operation in Manzila. Stories of Russian mercenaries arriving in cargo planes? Invented. The planes carried United Nations equipment and military supplies. No secrets, no schemes. And then came the real fury. He turned his gaze directly towards the cameras and said, "The majority of Western media are professional liars. They have spent years manipulating, distorting, and confusing. But today, with their own reports, they have exposed themselves. The African youth must open their eyes." He reminded the nation and the world of how Western narratives have destroyed leaders before. Laurent Gbagbo, once painted as a tyrant, was dragged to the International Criminal Court, only to be acquitted. Muammar Gaddafi was demonized, hunted, and killed, plunging Libya into endless chaos. These were not isolated errors, he argued. They were part of a deliberate playbook. "Do you want bread or do you want a nation?" he asked, referring to the eternal tug-of-war between short-term comfort and long-term sovereignty. Because when these media outlets attack a country, they paint it however they want, so the world will hate it before they destroy it. It wasn't just a speech, it was a sermon, a call to consciousness. Online, the response was electric. Videos of his speech flooded TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook. Hashtags like Nak Ibrahim Traoré, "We do not kneel," and Africa Rising began trending across Francophone Africa. In Mali and Niger, youth groups held impromptu rallies echoing his slogans. In the diaspora, Burkina Faso students and professionals sent open letters of support. Even within Burkina Faso, Traoré's popularity surged, particularly among the older generation. For many who lived through past coups, foreign interference, and the fall of strong African leaders, Traoré's words were not radical. They were righteous. He had dared to speak aloud what many had whispered for years. Yet the danger wasn't gone. With every truth he spoke, the pressure increased. Opponents within the military began whispering of power vacuums. Exiled politicians, some allied with France, spread claims of leadership negotiations behind closed doors. "There is no vacancy of power," Traoré said. "If there is, then let them come, take it." But they won't. He accused these actors of conspiring with terrorists, of being paid agents working not for peace but for destabilization. "We are in 2024, he said. "The Burkina Faso people are no longer naive." Despite the pressure, Traoré remained remarkably calm. His tone didn't waver. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten retaliation. Instead, he leaned on something far more potent, moral legitimacy. He told the nation that his government had no foreign bank accounts, no offshore assets, nothing to be used for blackmail. "We've sacrificed our entire youth for this country," he said. Fear? Zero fear. These words didn't just resonate with citizens. They challenged a global system. In a world where leaders often hide behind lawyers, PR teams, and handlers, Ibrahim Traoré was showing his face again and again. The emotional peak of his appearance came when he was asked, "Do you feel fear for your life?" His response was chilling in its simplicity. "Only God decides when we go. We've already faced death on the battlefield. Everything from now on is bonus." And with that, he dismantled the last weapon of his opponents, fear. But the real war wasn't on the battlefield. It was in the headlines. It was in the whispers of foreign analysts, the assumptions of exiled politicians, the carefully crafted stories in glossy European magazines. It was the war for Africa's narrative. And for once, Burkina Faso had a voice fighting back. An explosion can wound more than flesh. It can rupture trust, destabilize economies, and send ripples of fear through entire communities. But in Burkina Faso, what followed the RTB incident wasn't collapse, it was consolidation. In the immediate aftermath of the explosion and the media storm it ignited, two competing forces took shape. On one hand, there was fear, the natural human response to the unknown. Civilians who heard the blast from their homes, workers who felt the tremor beneath their feet, and families abroad who saw the headlines and assumed the worst. On the other, there was resolve, the emerging clarity that someone was trying to manipulate the story of Burkina Faso for their own ends. Traoré's public reappearance helped tip the balance. His willingness to address the nation face-to-face without scripts or security was rare, and it worked. In the weeks that followed, surveys among citizens in Ouagadougou and Bobo-Dioulasso showed a rise in public confidence in the transitional government. The streets, once filled with whispers, now echoed with slogans. "We do not kneel" had become more than a quote. It was a mindset. But even resilience has limits. Economically, the nation felt the tremors. Foreign investors, particularly in mining and infrastructure, paused projects, citing instability. International embassies issued travel advisories. News agencies ran bleak headlines that did more harm than the explosion itself. But Traoré didn't ignore the problem. He tackled it directly. He told the press, "Burkina is stable. Since 2023, we are among the top 10 African countries attracting investment. Investors do not come for slogans. They come because they see vision." It was a gamble, but it paid off. Within 2 months, several investment delegations from West Africa, the Gulf, and even Eastern Europe had resumed talks. The data backed his claim. The National Investment Council reported an uptick in small and medium-sized investment contracts, a sign that, even amidst the noise, confidence was returning. Yet perhaps the most profound impact was not economic, it was psychological. For years, Burkina Faso had been framed as fragile, a country of coups, terrorism, and poverty. Its people, especially the elderly, carried scars of failed transitions and broken promises. But now something different was happening. Elders were not only listening, they were advising. They were sharing stories of the Sankara era, drawing parallels between then and now. In villages and towns, gatherings turned into forums where elders and youth debated the path forward. The civil service, too, felt the shift. While some feared reprisals or instability, many began to view the new leadership not as a junta, but as a corrective force, a chance to restore national pride. This was not a polished democracy. It was something raw, something forming in real time. Politically, however, the terrain remained treacherous. Opposition figures, some in exile, others still embedded within the state apparatus, sought to exploit the situation. Leaked documents, anonymous sources, and foreign media channels suggested that factions within the military were in quiet disagreement with Traoré's hard line against France and his growing cooperation with non-Western allies. Some accused him of isolating Burkina diplomatically. Others claimed he was turning the country into a pawn for external powers like Russia or Iran. But none of these claims gained traction with the people. Why? Because of authenticity. When asked whether he feared internal betrayal, Traoré responded bluntly, "Let them try, but Burkina is no longer sleeping. Our people are watching, and the hour of deceit has passed." Still, the dangers of internal division were real. The transition process, originally meant to last 21 months, was being challenged from multiple angles. Some wanted elections immediately. Others argued that rushing would hand the country back to the same corrupt elites who had failed it before. So Traoré posed a question to the nation. Do we want to rush back to what destroyed us? Or do we take our time and rebuild with dignity? And it wasn't just rhetoric. Community-based consultations began with input from religious leaders, youth organizations, and civil society actors. For the first time in decades, the question of governance was not being dictated by Paris, Washington, or Brussels, but by the streets of Ouagadougou, the farmers in Kaya, and the diaspora in Abidjan. This was not just damage control, it was nation-building in real time. Of course, challenges remained. Inflation, insecurity in the north, and a strained public sector weighed heavily on the government. But the psychological shift, this growing belief that Burkina could define itself, was powerful. So we ask you, the viewer, do you believe it's time Africa stopped being afraid of its own voice? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We're listening. Because what's happening in Burkina Faso is no longer just a national affair. It's a mirror to the entire continent, a test of whether African nations can stand on their own terms, even when the world tries to rewrite their story. Still, one question echoed through the region. Was this just the calm before another storm? Long before the explosion at RTB, long before the helicopters and the rumors, the world had already drawn its conclusions about Burkina Faso. It was a poor nation, a fragile democracy, a puzzle to be solved by external powers. But the truth unfolding in 2024 revealed something else entirely. A country not lost, but awakening. And that awakening challenged powerful interests. The Western press, particularly outlets such as France 24, RFI, Le Monde, and Jeune Afrique, had long held a narrative monopoly over Francophone Africa. Their coverage often blurred the line between journalism and geopolitics, between storytelling and steering. So when Captain Ibrahim Traoré emerged not just as a military leader, but as a defiant voice against neo-colonial narratives, their headlines sharpened. Instead of reporting the RTB explosion as an accident, which it was, they framed it as a symptom of disarray. Instead of acknowledging the calm and order Traoré brought in the aftermath, they focused on unverified claims of internal dissent, mutiny, and Russian mercenaries. They weren't reporting news. They were manufacturing anxiety. And in the background stood the West's larger strategic interest in the Sahel, a region rich in gold, uranium, and access routes, but plagued by rising anti-Western sentiment. While France's influence had been waning since the removal of its military bases from neighboring Mali and Burkina Faso, the United States still maintained diplomatic footholds. Officially, Washington remained cautious, calling for stability and democratic transition. But behind closed doors, there were concerns. What did Traoré's pivot towards Russia mean? Could a successful transition without Western approval become a model for others? Meanwhile, ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, issued soft statements calling for dialogue. But their credibility had already been dented by their heavy-handed stance on coups in Mali and Niger, where public sentiment often sided against them. In this case, even they appeared more measured, unsure of how to handle a popular soldier who seemed neither tyrant nor puppet. Then there were the Russians. Despite media hysteria, Russia's actual presence in Burkina Faso was modest, mostly in the form of security advisors, training agreements, and diplomatic overtures. The notorious IL-76 planes that landed in Ouagadougou were, in fact, transporting United Nations cargo. Still, the myth of Russian mercenary invasion made for convenient fear-mongering. But perhaps the most revealing piece was this. The people of Burkina Faso did not care who disapproved. Their focus was clear: security, sovereignty, and a leadership that spoke their language. And Traoré, in many ways, embodied that defiance. For decades, African governments had been made to apologize for asserting independence. They were told to wait, to consult, to comply. But in 2024, the script was flipping. And in this global chessboard, one move remains unseen, but dangerously close. In moments of crisis, nations either fracture or forge something stronger. For Burkina Faso, the explosion at RTB and the global noise that followed became a defining fork in the road. And now, with the smoke cleared, the country faces a choice that extends far beyond its borders. What kind of Africa does it want to be? Captain Ibrahim Traoré made his answer clear. Not through declarations, but through posture. By refusing to run, by confronting fear, by speaking plainly to his people, and rejecting foreign scripts, he showed that leadership no longer needs to ask for permission. But that choice comes with risks. The threat of further disinformation remains high. Foreign interest will not relent easily, especially when Burkina sits atop gold reserves, a key strategic corridor, and a politically symbolic place in the anti-imperial wave sweeping West Africa. Sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and covert destabilization attempts are all on the table. Yet within that storm lies opportunity. If Burkina Faso continues to build internal trust between the government and citizens, between elders and youth, it could become a model for sovereign transformation. A nation that defines democracy not as a copy of the West, but as something born of its own soil, shaped by its own culture, guided by its own history. That path demands not only political strength, but societal patience. Real transitions take time. Real independence requires more than slogans. It demands institutions, education, infrastructure, and the belief that Africa can trust itself. This is where the role of the diaspora becomes critical. From Atlanta to Abidjan, from London to Lomé, Africans abroad carry not just remittances, but influence, ideas, and narratives. The more they echo homegrown truth, the harder it becomes for external forces to rewrite Africa's story. But the most powerful force remains within. In markets, in mosques, in neighborhood debates and grandmother prayers, there is a new whisper forming in Africa. Not just resistance, not just pride, but a readiness, a collective desire to rise, not with anger, but with clarity. They made us fear unity, Traore once said. Now it's time we fear nothing else. And if that unity can be nurtured, not through war, but through wisdom, structure, and vision, Burkina Faso will not stand alone. It will stand as proof. Because the future of this continent will not be dictated by Parisian newsrooms or Washington think tanks. It will be built village by village, voice by voice, each one echoing the same truth. Africa is not a child, it is a civilization. And if Africa is finally awake, what will she do next? In a world addicted to drama and chaos, the explosion at RTB could have become just another footnote in Africa's fragile state narrative. Another reason for the world to look down. Another excuse for foreign commentators to nod and say, "We told you so," but it wasn't. Because from that explosion rose not panic, but presence. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood where many would have hidden. He spoke when many would have spun. He told the truth, not because it was easy, but because his people deserved it. And that, dear viewers, is what leadership looks like. In every continent, power tries to reshape truth. But in Burkina Faso, a young captain told the world that his people were no longer afraid. He reminded Africa that dignity is not something to beg for, it is something to protect. And now the choice is ours. Will we, the children of the soil, the keepers of our ancestors' prayers, finally believe in our own strength? Will we defend not just borders, but truth itself? Because this is not just about one man or one nation. It is about the future we choose to speak into existence. If you feel Africa deserves better, louder, braver voices, don't just watch, like, share, and subscribe. At Africa Rising, we speak for those who stood silent for too long. Tell us what you think of Ibrahim Traoré. Tell us what future you see for an Africa that refuses to kneel. Let the comments say it loud. New Africa. Africa Rise. Africa can do it. Let us honor not just a speech, but a spirit. Let us say it together. Africa Rising. Not someday, but now.